The last human colony fell in 13 minutes. That was all it took for fire and silence to consume New Carthage, a city carved from Martian stone and stitched together with the stubborn hope of a broken species. From orbit, it was a jewel, a lattice of light, oxygen gardens glowing emerald against the red dust. But from the ground, when the Kyrath warships arrived, it was a tomb waiting to be sealed. Their weapons didn't roar like ours. They whispered, each shot a ripple, erasing entire streets as if they had never existed. Families turned to ash mid-step, their shadows burned into walls that collapsed seconds later. Soldiers fought, of course, rifles spitting fury, but every bullet sounded like a desperate prayer. None were answered. Captain Alara Vey watched from a shattered control tower, her throat raw with the screams she had already given. On the tactical glass, red markers bled across the colony map until there was nothing left to mark. "Evacuate who we can," she whispered, though she knew there were none left to save. The comms hissed back with broken static, the dying voices of her squad bleeding into one another. The last thing she heard from the surface was a child's voice, cut short by silence, sharper than any blade. Above, the Kirath fleet hung in orbit like vultures, their flagship, jagged, obsidian, alive with glowing scars, broadcast a single phrase across all frequencies. "Humanity ends tonight." The words weren't just transmitted, they were carved into the minds of every survivor, echoing like a curse. That was their way, not just to kill, but to erase, to make sure memory itself bowed. In 13 minutes, the light of New Carthage was gone. No smoke, no debris, just a hollow place where a world had been. The galaxy recorded it as the extinction of a species. First contact, they called it. First and final. But extinction is a word spoken too easily by conquerors. Beneath the ashes, hidden in fractures of space, no alien dared to enter. Something else stirred. In the silence after slaughter, seeds had been planted. Seeds of fury, of survival, of evolution. And though the Kirath believed the humans were dust scattered into nothing, they had forgotten one truth that history never lets die. Humanity doesn't vanish. It waits. A shard of black sky fractured near the edge of the belt, a ripple too small for the Dominion to notice. From within, a single distorted signal pulsed outward, faint but undeniable. It carried no words, only a heartbeat, a rhythm that spoke of something impossible, something returning. The massacre was not an end. It was a beginning. And when humanity returned, it would not come as it once had, fragile, desperate, begging for recognition. The second contact would not be a plea for peace. It would be a reckoning. Ghosts of humanity. The Kirath Dominion recorded the fall of humanity as a footnote in their endless catalogue of conquests. In their chronicles, carved into living, crystal and sung in guttural chants. The humans were described as rash, primitive, obsessed with defiance, even when logic demanded surrender. To the Kyrath, this was the ultimate insult, to waste life on pride rather than submit to inevitability. Their philosophers debated it, their generals mocked it, and their young were taught that humans had been a brief flicker of noise in an otherwise ordered universe. The message was clear. The extinction of Earth's children was not just a victory, but a warning to any who dared imagine themselves irreplaceable. And so the galaxy moved on. Trade routes shifted. Border worlds fell in line with Dominion law. The Kirath's scarred black ships hung like executioners in orbit over lesser civilizations. Their presence, a reminder of what happened to those who'd resisted. The whispers of humanity's end drifted further and further into rumor, into myth. 13 minutes. That was all it took to erase a species from the stars. Or so they believed. But myths are stubborn. And sometimes myths refuse to die. On the 1000th cycle after New Carthage's erasure, a signal reached the Dominion's archives. It was faint, wrapped in distortions that bent scanners into loops. Archivists assumed it was nothing more than static, a remnant echo from a collapsed star. But as they passed its layers, the distortion began to reveal a pattern. Not words, not language, but rhythm, a steady pulse, too deliberate to be accident. It carried across subspace like a phantom heartbeat, slipping into channels that should have been silent. High Chancellor Vorak dismissed it. Residual noise, he told the council, though his mandibles clicked in unease. Yet, among the lower ranks, soldiers who had witnessed the madness of humanity firsthand, rumors ignited. Some swore the signal carried a ghost's breath, that it clawed at the mind like the last screams of the colonies. A superstition spread. The humans had not been erased, only hidden, waiting to return. The Kirath called it the Echo Curse. But the Dominion was not a race that admitted fear. Instead, they buried it. The signal was sealed in restricted archives, locked behind codes only the High Command could access. Officially, humanity was gone. Unofficially, the Kirath began reinforcing their borders. They doubled their patrols near uncharted sectors. They listened more closely to static. And when soldiers thought no one was watching, they whispered the same question into the darkness. What if they come back? For centuries, no answer came. The Dominion grew complacent again, their fear fading like smoke. The myth of humanity decayed into laughter, then into silence. The archives gathered dust. Until one day, on the edge of the Veil Nebula, a Dominion scout ship reported something that should have been impossible. A ripple, not noise, not echo, a doorway, and through it, something moved. The return. The hollow veil was not meant for life. It was a fracture. In reality, a place where time folded like crumpled paper and physics twisted on itself until meaning slipped away. When the last human fleets stumbled into it, driven by desperation and rage, half of them were torn apart in seconds. Ships stretched like glass pulled too thin, voices dissolved into static, entire battalions erased as if they had never been. But the ones who survived learned something that no alien empire could ever imagine: how to live in a place where existence itself was unstable. Generations passed inside the veil, where days and centuries mingled. Children were born with eyes that shimmered like fractured starlight, their senses tuned to vibrations in the fabric of reality. They called themselves Veil-born, not entirely human by the old measure, yet more human than anything the galaxy had ever seen. They carried the memory of fire and slaughter, the stories of 13 minutes, repeated until every child knew them by heart. They forged ships from Veil steel, a material that shifted in color depending on who observed it, and their weapons were not bullets or plasma, but resonance, sound shaped into force, vibration sculpted into death. Commander Elara Vey stood aboard the Eclipse Spear, flagship of the Veil-born Armada. She was older now, her skin marked with faint scars that pulsed under veil light, but her voice carried the same steel it had on that last day at New Carthage. "We were erased once," she told her crew, her words echoing across 1,000 listening ships. "Now we return. Not as beggars, not as ghosts, but as something greater." Her command council flanked her. Dr. Eamon Cade, the scientist whose obsession with the Veil had driven humanity's survival, and Sergeant Dax Marrow, his body rebuilt with veiled steel grafts, his mind scarred by memories no time could dull. The fleet emerged into real space with no fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet, chilling ripple of the veil opening like a wound. A Dominion listening post was the first to see them. The Kirath soldiers, hardened by years of conquest, watched their sensors fracture as if the laws of physics themselves rebelled. Shapes flickered, ships that looked like shadows given form, hulls shimmering between existence and absence. Then the voices came, transmitted on every frequency, a single word in a language the Kirath thought extinct. Return. The listening post scrambled, alarms blaring, but it was too late. The Veilborn didn't unleash fire or missiles. Instead, sound filled the void, low, thrumming waves that shattered armor and cracked bones without a single shot fired. To the Kirath, it was madness incarnate. Soldiers screamed, their own voices weaponized against them, their bodies collapsing as if their shadows had been torn free. The survivors whispered in terror. They fight like shadows, like nightmares. Back aboard the Eclipse Spear, Elara watched in silence. This was only the beginning. The galaxy had forgotten humanity. Now it would remember. The opening gambit. The Kirath Dominion prided itself on absolute order. Every outpost, every patrol, every flicker of comm traffic was catalogued, measured, and disciplined into submission. That order shattered the moment the Veilborn struck their first target. The listening post at Droska 7 wasn't a fortress, but it was never meant to be vulnerable. It monitored 100 light-years of Dominion-controlled space, its sensors feeding into the strategic web that had strangled lesser empires for centuries. On its observation decks, Kirath soldiers sat in ordered rows, claws clicking against crystal interfaces, their eyes unblinking. They never saw it coming. The shadows appeared first, shapes that sensors marked as anomalies, not ships. The Dominion's officers scoffed, their mandibles clattering with irritation until the shadows moved. They drifted closer, not bound by thrust or trajectory, sliding as though space itself was carrying them. Then came the sound. Not alarms, not comm chatter, resonance. A low vibration hummed through the station's walls, shaking panels loose, rattling spines. One soldier clutched his ears, screaming that the station itself was alive. Elara Vey's voice carried across the Eclipse Spear. Precision, no wasted lives. Leave them something to fear. Her words were calm, almost cold. On her order, the Veilborn fleet released its weapons, not lasers, not missiles, but chords of sound shaped into impossible geometry. The vibrations struck the outpost like invisible spears, collapsing entire corridors. Metal warped, gravity wells buckled. Kirath soldiers turned their weapons toward the dark, firing wildly, their plasma bolts vanishing into the void. Inside, Dr. Amon Cade observed with clinical detachment. "They don't understand," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the way resonance shattered a command deck without spilling blood. To them, war is destruction. To us, war is redefinition. Dax Marrow stood beside him, fists clenched, scars glowing faintly under the light. "Don't talk like a philosopher, Doc. They killed our people. This is justice." The station fell in less than 3 minutes, but unlike New Carthage, there was no silence after. Survivors staggered through wreckage, their comms broadcasting fragmented cries across Dominion space. They fight like shadows, shadows with voices. The word spread faster than the battle itself, igniting whispers across sectors that had long believed humanity dead. For the first time in centuries, the Dominion's perfect web trembled. The Kirath Council received the reports in disbelief. Their generals argued that the anomaly was a trick, a malfunction. But those who had fought humans before, the few veterans still alive, recognized something in the fear-laced transmissions. Humanity had returned, and they had become something else, something the Dominion was not prepared to face. On the bridge of the Eclipse Spear, Alara listened to the panic ripple through enemy channels. She allowed herself the faintest smile. "Let them wonder," she said. "Let them remember." The opening gambit had been played, and for the first time since the massacre, humanity was not the prey. Old wounds, new wars. The Kirath Dominion had not gathered in full council for a century. Their chambers, vast domes of crystalline spires, pulsed with bioluminescence as generals, strategists, and philosophers argued with a venom that shook the pillars. At the center, High Chancellor Vorak clutched the newest reports in trembling claws. Outposts annihilated, fleets crippled, survivors, speaking of humans that fought like nightmares. He hissed in disbelief, yet fear gnawed beneath his carapace. They were erased, one general spat, his scales bristling. "The records are clear. Humanity is gone." "Then explain this," Vorak thundered, throwing the fractured transmissions onto the council floor. The chamber fell silent as the distorted human word echoed through the crystalline walls. "Return." The Dominion debated its course. Some demanded immediate annihilation, every sector scoured until no trace remained. Others, more cautious, suggested study. "What if they are not what they were?" hissed a scholar. "We may learn from them. Adapt their..." His voice was drowned by the roar of those who remembered the madness of human defiance. The council fractured, its unity bleeding away in the face of an enemy that was supposed to be dead. Far from their debates, the Veil-born fleet wrestled with fractures of its own. In the command chamber of the Eclipse Spear, Alara Vey studied the aftershocks of their first strike. Fear spread through Dominion space like wildfire, but not all humans celebrated. Dr. Amon Cade paced, his eyes alight with hunger. "We have the Dominion on its knees. Now is the time to end them. Strike their capitals, collapse their order, wipe them from history as they try to wipe us." Alara's jaw tightened. "We are not executioners. We are survivors. Every strike we make must serve survival, not vengeance." Dax Marrow leaned against the bulkhead, his metal crafts gleaming faintly. "You two argue like old ghosts. Survival, vengeance. It doesn't matter to the men and women who've bled for this. What matters is ending the war before it swallows us whole." His voice dropped, the scar on his cheek glowing with a faint velite. "But there's something you should know. Not all of us stayed loyal." The chamber stilled. Dax's eyes were hard, bitter. "During the first years in the Veil, some of us made deals. Not everyone believed we could endure the madness of that place. They reached out to the Kirath, offered knowledge, secrets, obedience, in exchange for protection." He looked away, voice heavy. "We called them the Kryn Pact, and they survived too." Alara's breath caught. "You're telling me there are humans fighting for the Dominion?" "Not just humans," Dax said. "Leaders, families, people we once bled beside." The words struck harder than any Dominion weapon. Humanity's return had not come as a single fist, but as a fractured blade, half aimed at the Kirath, half pointed at itself. Alara closed her eyes, the weight of command pressing harder than ever. "Then the war ahead is not just against the Dominion. It's against our own shattered alliances." The asteroid fortress of Kryn Station was a wound in space, an old mining colony hollowed into jagged caverns, now pulsing with Dominion light. When the Vale-born fleet drew near, its defenses did not react as Kirath defenses should. Instead, the station's signal flickered with something human, a faint melody of Earth's old frequencies, twisted, distorted, but undeniably theirs. Elara Vey stood on the command deck of the Eclipse Spear, her heart pounding with a rhythm she hadn't felt since the fall of New Carthage. "They're here," she whispered. "Our own." Dr. Eamon Cade's eyes narrowed, voice sharp with contempt. "Defectors. They sold our future to lizards, burned them out of the stars." But Dax Marrow said nothing. His gaze was locked on the incoming transmission. The face that appeared in the hollow screen was human, unmistakably so. Her features carried the same veil-scarred glow as his, eyes fractured with starlight, skin streaked with faint resonance veins. She wore Kyrath armor, etched with Dominion glyphs, and she smiled. "Dax," she said softly. His knees almost buckled. "Talia." The council chamber froze. Ormond spat. "Your sister." Talia's voice carried the weight of betrayal, wrapped in sorrow. "You survived the Veil. So did I. But unlike you, I learned the truth. We are not meant to rule, brother. We are meant to serve. The Dominion understands what we cannot. They give us order, a place in the galaxy. We are not shadows. We are tools." Dax's scar burned, glowing like molten steel. "You think bowing makes you strong. You think selling us out makes you safe." His fists clenched, metal grafts groaning. "They slaughtered our people in 13 minutes. Talia's eyes shimmered, tears suspended in vile light. "And resisting them will slaughter us again." The channel cut, and the station's weapons flared to life. Not alien plasma, but human-forged resonance cannons, stolen and repurposed. The Veil-born fleet reeled as their own technology was turned against them. Ships shattered in silence, their hulls cracking with the sound of betrayal. Elara barked orders, her voice cold steel. "Shields to full resonance modulation. Return fire. Disable, not destroy. If they're truly ours, we do not erase them." Eamon slammed a fist against the console. "Mercy will kill us. Strike now, or we lose everything." But Elara stood firm, even as the fleet buckled under the assault. Her command cut through chaos. "We will not kill our own." The battle raged, echo against echo, resonance tearing through the void like dueling symphonies. Dax's voice broke through the comms, raw and shaking. "Elara, if we fight them like enemies, we'll tear ourselves apart. If we don't fight them, they'll hand us to the Dominion." His scar burned brighter, a living brand of the choice before him. "So tell me, what's worse, dying by alien hands or by our own?" The Eclipse Spear shuddered as the first Veil-born vessel exploded in silence. And in that moment, humanity's return fractured into something far more dangerous than the Dominion had ever planned. The Veil unleashed. The hollow Veil had always been more than refuge. It was a living wound in reality, a place where energy bled from unseen dimensions. For decades, Dr. Eamon Cade had studied it, cataloging distortions, capturing fragments of resonance no sane scientist dared touch. He told no one the full extent of what he had built in secret. Not until the battle at Kryn Station pushed him to the edge. As the Eclipse Spear buckled under resonance fire from human traitors, Eamon's fingers danced across forbidden consoles, unlocking code locks hidden even from Elara. "Enough of this half-war," he muttered, voice trembling with both fury and awe. "We end them, here and now." Elara caught him. "What are you doing?" He didn't look up. "What I should have done years ago. With a final command, he activated the device. A shard of the hollow veil itself, harvested and contained, pulsed in the ship's core. The stars outside bent. Space rippled like water under a storm. Then it collapsed inward, dragging everything nearby into a maelstrom of fractured existence. The Kryn station screamed. Its hull stretched, twisted, and snapped in silence. Chunks of metal folding into themselves like paper, burning without flame. The Dominion cruisers stationed nearby shattered in moments, their obsidian spines bending until they dissolved into mist. Even Veil-born ships shuddered, resonance shielding straining against the impossible gravity. On the bridge, alarms howled, panels cracked, crew screamed as their bodies flickered, half here, half nowhere. Elara gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "You're tearing reality apart." Eamon's eyes gleamed with mad certainty. "This is what the Veil gave us. Not survival, ascendancy. We are gods now." Dax Marrow staggered forward, scars blazing with furious light. He seized Eamon by the collar, hauling him back from the console. "Gods don't kill their own. You'll tear us apart before the Kyrath even fire a shot." Outside, the battlefield had become unrecognizable. Starlight bent into spirals. Ships drifted sideways without moving, and voices bled through comms that didn't belong to anyone alive. Echoes of screams, laughter, whispers, the Veil leaking its madness into real space. The Kryn-packed ships faltered, their resonance weapons sputtering under the distortion. Talia's voice crackled across the channel, ragged and horrified. "Dax, what have you done? This isn't war. It's annihilation." Elara's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a blade. "Shut it down, Eamon, now." But Eamon only whispered, eyes lost in starlight that wasn't real. "We can't go back. Not after this. We've shown them what we are." The Veil rift widened, pulling at everything. Ships, debris, even light itself. And in that roaring silence, humanity stood at the edge of victory and self-destruction. Elara's decision was immediate, her voice breaking yet resolute. "Then I'll do what you won't." She turned to her officers, her command ringing through every ship. "Prepare to sacrifice the flagship. We'll stabilize the Veil or die trying." And as the Eclipse spear turned toward the rift, its engines blazing brighter than stars, the Veil screamed like a wounded god. The turning point. The Eclipse spear plunged toward the rift, engines roaring like dying suns. Space buckled around her, stars warping into ribbons. The battlefield stretched into impossible spirals. The hollow Veil was no longer just leaking. It was consuming. Dominion cruisers fractured like brittle bones, their crews vanishing in screams swallowed by silence. Even Veil-born ships, tuned to the strange rhythms of the Veil, groaned under the strain, their hulls cracking like glass under pressure. On the bridge, Elara Vey stood tall, her face pale beneath the glow of Voilite, but her voice carried steady. "Stabilization protocols. Route all power to core resonance dampeners." Her officers hesitated, glancing at her with terror. They knew what she intended. To plunge the flagship into the rift was suicide. But Elara's gaze cut through their fear, unyielding. "Humanity doesn't survive by retreating. We endure by standing where no one else can." Dax Marrow slammed his fist against the console, his scars flaring. "You can't throw yourself away, Elara. We need you." She gave him a faint, weary smile. "No, Dax. You need a chance. That's all I can give in the background." Eamon Cade raged, tearing at his restraints, eyes wild with obsession. "You fools! This is our ascension. Don't chain it. Embrace it." His voice cracked into manic laughter as he watched the flagship dive into the madness he had unleashed. Outside, the Eclipse spear blazed like a comet, resonance fields shimmering as it slammed into the rift. The ship's frame cracked, beams twisting, but its sacrifice forced the rift to slow. The impossible whirlpool shuddered, its pull weakening. The scattered fleets, both Veilborn and Kirath, watched in awe as the flagship burned itself alive to cage the Veil's fury. For a moment, silence claimed the battlefield. Then, across the Dominion's channels, panic erupted. Generals shouted for retreat. Soldiers muttered in terror. They would destroy themselves just to cage reality. They aren't soldiers, they're fanatics, monsters. Fear, once buried under arrogance, spread through the Kirath like wildfire. The Veilborn saw it too. Inspired by Ilara's sacrifice, their ships rallied. Resonance blasts struck in unison, tearing through Dominion lines. Dax, his voice raw, barked into the comms. For Ilara! For New Carthage! Human voices rose in chorus, each word cutting across the void like thunder. The Dominion faltered. Ships that once seemed invincible now reeled under the ferocity of a species that fought with grief, sharpened into a blade. For every Veilborn ship that fell, 3 Kirath burned. On the fractured remains of Kryn Station, Talia watched in stunned silence, her eyes wide with something she had not felt in years. Shame. They fight even against the universe itself, she whispered. Around her, defectors shifted uneasily, the certainty of their allegiance eroding. Back at the rift, the Eclipse spear finally broke apart, fragments glowing like dying stars before vanishing into stillness. The veil stabilized, its scream fading into a low hum. Ilara Vey was gone, but in her sacrifice, she had turned the tide. The battlefield was no longer just a clash of fleets. It was the moment the Kirath Dominion realized the nightmare they had resurrected. Humanity united not by victory, but by the willingness to burn everything, even themselves, to survive. The second contact. The Kirath homeworld had never known fear. Its skies were guarded by fleets that blotted out the stars, its surface ringed with planetary cannons capable of vaporizing continents. No invader had ever dared approach its orbit. Yet on that night, the shadows of Veilborn ships slid from the darkness like phantoms, their hulls rippling with unearthly light. No alarm sounded at first. Sensors registered nothing but static. But when the static grew into a low, steady pulse, the Kirath command realized too late what had arrived. The Dominion's leaders scrambled in their crystalline chambers, voices shrill with disbelief. They survived. They should be dust. How did they reach us? Panic rippled through ranks, trained never to tremble. Above their capital city, humanity did not fire. No resonance blasts, no missiles. Instead, every Veilborn vessel lit with white fire, projecting a single transmission into the skies of the Kirath homeworld. Across every screen, every comm channel, every corner of their empire, a hologram formed. Human silhouettes, faceless, cloaked in shadow, yet unmistakably alive. Their voices layered into one, 1,000 tones speaking as one. We are not what we were. The words struck deeper than any weapon. They echoed not only in the ears of the Kirath, but in their minds, vibrating with resonance that twisted thought itself. Citizens clutched their heads, not from pain, but from realization. They remembered the chronicles, how the Dominion had promised humanity's extinction. And yet, here they were, not broken, not extinct, but transformed. In the streets, riots broke out. Citizens shouted at their leaders, demanding answers. Some begged for mercy, others demanded vengeance. But all were united in one truth. The Dominion had lied. The empire that claimed invincibility now trembled because of a ghost it thought long dead. On the bridge of the eclipse, Spear's successor, Dax Morrow, stood tall, his voice cutting through the transmission. You massacred us in 13 minutes. You thought that was the end. But humanity does not end. Humanity endures. Humanity returns. His scar burned like fire, his face shadowed in the glow of violet. You wanted fear. Now you will have it. The Dominion's war council collapsed into chaos. Some shouted for immediate retaliation, but their fleets, still reeling from the Veil's rift, hesitated. Others whispered that war was already lost, not in weapons, but in will. For the first time in history, the Kirath saw their people doubt. And then came the second twist. The humans did not attack. They simply held their position, projecting the same message across the galaxy, not just to the Kirath, but to every race that had bowed to them. We are not what we were. The brilliance of it was devastating. Humanity's weapon wasn't their resonance cannons or their warped fleets. It was the idea they carried, the proof that extinction was a lie, that defiance could outlast genocide. To the oppressed, it was hope. To the Kirath, it was poison. Talia watched from Kryn Station, her heart torn in two. She had sworn allegiance to order, to survival through submission. But as the sky filled with human silhouettes, her oath cracked. They didn't come to destroy, she whispered. They came to remind us. And across the galaxy, the unthinkable happened. An empire built on fear felt its first fracture of collapse, not from a battle, but from the return of a single word: human. Resolution and open loop. The Dominion sky was aflame with silence. No missiles fell, no beams split the heavens, but the weight of humanity's message burned hotter than any weapon. Across the Kirath homeworld, riots grew into revolts. Citizens toppled statues of their warlords, shattering them into shards that glittered under the pale glow of violet. Whole legions laid down their arms, unsure whether their rulers could protect them from a species they had sworn extinct. The Dominion, once unshakable, fractured in a single night. From orbit, the Veil-born fleet did not advance. Their ships hovered like watchful shadows, the transmission still repeating across the stars. On the bridge of the command ship Eternal Veil, Dax Morrow stood with a weight heavier than his crafted scars. He had seen Alara Ve sacrifice everything to cage the Veil's fury. And now, the burden of leadership was his. We've broken them without firing a shot, he said quietly, though his voice carried across the bridge. But victory is not the same as peace. Dr. Armancade, bound in restraints after his betrayal, spat venom. Peace? There is no peace. You've shown them weakness by sparing them. When the Dominion recovers, they'll come back, harder, stronger. Only annihilation ensures survival. His words were fire, but his eyes were madness, glowing with the hunger of the Veil. Dax turned from him, jaw clenched. Or maybe we've shown them something they cannot fight. The idea of us. The idea that no matter what they do, humanity will rise from the ashes. The crew watched in silence, each carrying the memory of Alara's sacrifice. They knew humanity had not won a war that night. They had begun one, and it was no longer just against the Kirath. It was against the galaxy's very belief in permanence. On Kryn Station, Talia Morrow stood among her fractured pact. Some defectors stared at the human transmission with awe, others with dread. For the first time since her betrayal, she felt the pull of something greater than survival. They don't need to destroy us, she whispered. They've already made us choose. Her soldiers looked to her, and though she said no more, the seeds of rebellion were planted in hearts that had long been chained. And then, silence. The transmission ended. The Veil-born ships vanished back into their fracture of reality, leaving only echoes behind. Across the galaxy, fear and hope clashed like twin storms. Oppressed species whispered of alliances, of rebellion. The Kirath Dominion, fractured and humiliated, scrambled to rebuild its grip. And in the shadows of unknown sectors, other empires began to stir, listening to the heartbeat that had returned. Back aboard the Eternal Veil, Dax stood alone, gazing into the rift that shimmered at the edge of the stars. He whispered to himself, to Alara, to all who had fallen. First contact was a massacre. The second was a mirror, and what they saw was themselves. Just as the veil seemed to calm, a new signal rippled through the void. It was not Kyrath. It was not human. A glyph appeared on the consoles, alien, jagged, alive with light that no one recognized. The bridge fell silent as its pulse echoed like a second heartbeat. Humanity had returned, but they were not the only ones watching.